Thank you. We're so grateful to Purpose-Built Communities for the production of that video, the featuring of our amazing residents, no least of which Tangia Smikle, who's actually here today. Please give her a round of applause for her sharing her story. We are so excited to have you here. If you knew anything about our group, you would not be surprised that we wanted to host one of these from the first time we went to one. We're like, they're going to come to our town next year. And this day has finally arrived for us, and that sense of urgency is still working within us to discover an amazing story in this community. We have but a few minutes before we leave this room and get on buses and show you a little bit of what's happening in this community, and then just have a fun evening tonight. There are two perspective ideas I'd like to offer as you hear the different vantage points that the members of the Lift Orlando team, our board members, the representative of the communities of Westlakes that you'll learn more about in just a bit, will share each from the angle of their own journey into the Lift Orlando story. One is this unique theme of partnership, that we realized that you could not really create lasting change through what Tangia described as handouts instead of hands up. The idea of coming alongside communities, of locking arms, of writing a future together had to be the kind of long-term and serious commitment that goes far beyond programs, benefits, and entitlements that we really needed to step up to and would require more of us. It also required less in the sense that it would mean giving the spotlight to residents who live in communities, who own those communities, who should be the heroes of the story in their own communities. Secondly, you'll hear the story of this incredible part of our town blossoming before our eyes called the communities of Westlakes. You heard our mayor talk about the area west of downtown known as Paramore, historically the segregated neighborhood near our downtown region, with a history unfolded throughout 32805 for a renaissance in the 40s and 50s that built one of the first parts of the country where blacks could buy land, build homes as nice as they wanted, known as Washington Shores, first bank to lend to African Americans in the whole state. And the area in the middle, surrounding Camping World Stadium, where the neighborhoods around these beautiful lakes began to organize when we started coming on the scene, some might say against Lift Orlando, wondering who this new group was, before we began to build a relationship and a partnership. And in that organization, we named that whole area to be distinct from Paramore, distinct from Washington Shores, to be part of a brand new future on the shoulders of the African-American leaders that had built so much of what this great region is today, known as the communities of Westlakes. And so on stage with me, you'll meet the chairman of our board, Sittema, who we all still give credit or blame for wrapping us into this. Steve Hogan, the CEO of Florida Citrus Sports, the organization that runs this very rare and unique asset in our community that is Camping World Stadium. You'll learn a bit about their mission today. Tim Ayers, who is the president and director of the Westlakes Partnership. This is the organization structured as a separate entity from Lift Orlando, really independent with their own board. We offer support for the purpose of them having their own organization that speaks to and advocates for the will of residents in that community, providing a counterbalance of powers and voices to what we do. And Sandy Hostetter, who, like none other in our community, is an incredible advocate representing the business community with a heart and passion for fair and high quality housing for every resident in Central Florida. Now, I'll tell you right now, I love and admire each of these folks on stage. I could listen to each one of them for hours, and it's because every minute of it would be great. So what you're about to witness is a little bit of a miracle as I try to keep them each to 5 minutes or less with specific questions about their vantage point in this story. But would you please allow me a great and warm welcome to each of them on this stage. So in just a little bit, we're going to head out of this room. We're going to board buses and go drive through the community to see the project that is already full, what things are underway, and talk more about the hopes of the neighborhood moving into the future. But Tom, I wanted to start with you because one of the things that really drew me into this conversation was not just a common sense and desire for being about doing good work and being for the greater good, but you had a unique vantage point and perspective about the role of the business community. And it started for you in a particular event as a relatively new member of our community in Orlando at the time and driving west of downtown from your office. Would you describe that day in your life and maybe how your beliefs informed what followed?
What a delight to host you all here today. I just cannot tell you how long we've been looking forward to this day and how excited we are. To answer Eddy's specific question, my wife and I, my wife is in the audience here, moved here about 9 years ago, and the first 2 years all we did was work, really trying to focus on how to preserve and protect a company that I ran that was predominantly a real estate company coming out of the Great Recession, and it was pretty much a full-time job and then some. 2 years after I was here, I was invited, along with my wife, to go to the Citrus Bowl, which is literally like 1 mile from downtown, by my dear friend Bill Diamond and partner in crime, and driving through the communities of Paramore and Westlake for the first time in 2 years that I had been there. I was just amazed. My wife and I were just stunned at kind of what we saw. We just saw just pure economic blight. We saw abandoned buildings and boarded up windows and bars and we had a series of reactions, but it was set in a context of what I'd been going through personally. I'm a faith-based guy, and just my whole process of growing spiritually had led me through a process to really focus on the poor. And if you read the Bible, you can't read the Bible without being confronted almost on every other page with a reference to the poor, and specifically your responsibility to the poor. And so I was gripped by that, and that had been working on me for some time. And driving through that community, I was just struck by that, and it was one of those things that I just couldn't let go. It was sort of like, so what is my responsibility for that? And Sandy and I joke, being a kind of a new kid in the town, I was the guy to ask kind of the dumb question, or maybe just ask a question that people used to ask and sort of just got tired of asking, and I wasn't aware of efforts that had been tried and failed, and sometimes new, fresh eyes to old problems sometimes help. And so in the context of that, I just started gathering with people that I just had great affection for, and they're on this panel here, and try building a lift effort without a friend like Bill Diamond or Scott Boyd or Harold Mills or Bishop Wiggins or the rest of the board members. If you're a board member, please raise your hand. I mean, Terry, you just can't, you can't do it without a team like that. And so that was the backdrop. And then when we started to huddle, we did what business leaders do every day and take for granted every day, which is a focus on, okay, let's define the problem. What specifically is the problem that we're trying to address? And to answer that question, we started research, and we funded a household survey that was the largest survey in Central Florida's history to learn about the challenges of concentrated generational poverty. And this is before we had heard of purpose-built. And we essentially concluded that you can't just focus on housing or education or health and wellness or jobs. You need to do them all at the same time in the same geographical footprint. And oh, by the way, very convenient for us, that's the purpose-built model that we have come to learn so much about, and they've been unbelievable partners for us, coming to our board meetings for 5 years running. So the concept of having business leaders focus on setting strategy, driving for results, using their relationship of networks and friends and people of all places to accomplish this common good. We handpicked a board that is probably the envy of the nonprofits in the community, people that are brilliant brains but have an unbelievably compassionate heart, and the trust level and the commitment to excellence has just been something to behold. So it's been an unbelievable ride, and all of us would say that we are all the better for the work that we've done, way more than just that we feel good about the work that we've done.
Tom, thank you. Thank you. Your heart and your mind have been a huge inspiration to all of us. Thank you. So, Steve, you did not really have a history prior to that year with Tom. You guys come across each other at a dinner that's an annual tradition for the organization of Florida Citrus Sports. Talk a little bit about that encounter and the stadium itself, and where this energy meets the history of the stadium and the future vision that was already bubbling up in your heart.
Yeah, first I would just like to say that you don't feel worthy sitting up here in front of this group, because I think everybody in here probably has a great story to tell, and you'd love to hear it, over the next few days. So thank you for giving us this time to share with you at least a little bit of what's going on in Orlando. But we, since 1947 in Orlando was the very first postseason college football game that we had staged in our community. And that game was originally founded as a benefit for Children's Hospital in Umatilla, Florida. And from that day to today, it's kind of always been grounded in how can it become a resource for what ultimately grew into more children and educational initiatives. So the games and the things that had happened at the stadium in those days was 9,000 seats, and like a lot of college facilities kind of grew up around itself. But as it matured in the 70s and 80s and 90s, it was really more community-led, and it still is today. I mean, Tom Sittema is our chairman of Florida Citrus Sports, and Bill Diamond was one of the people who brought me into Florida Citrus Sports in 1995. Harold Mills, many of the other people that are on the LIFT board are essentially Florida Citrus Sports Board. And so that power and that desire to see that our organization, which is a 501c3 organization, a nonprofit driven at more impact, driving economic impact and community impact, was an opportunity, I think, and a strength for us that as we arrived at this moment kind of in our history here locally, we were uniquely positioned. There is no NFL tenant. It's a 65,000 seat facility that hosts the NFL Pro Bowl and major nationally televised events of importance in our community. But we're positioned to potentially differently focus what the resources could provide for our community than what maybe otherwise a normal NFL tenant would, or an NBA franchise or something of that nature. So as our stadium went through a painful public process, and thankfully the leadership of Mayor Jacobs here in the room, it went through a massive $200 million transformation in 2014, and soon we'll kind of finish that process for another $60 million in the next couple of years. We had the opportunity to reflect and say, we've been running summer camps, we've been invested, and it felt like an organization, as you looked at what it was doing, that was spread a mile wide and an inch deep with its philanthropy. And Tom and I think, flying around town in different ways, were thinking out loud about, wouldn't it be a shame if a $200 million investment in a football stadium in the poorest zip code in Central Florida was the shining example of investment? If that was really the definition of success, that would be a crime and just unjust. And I had the benefit since 95 or 97 really of working on the Florida Classic, which is one of the largest historically black college and university games in the country. We're proud of it. Florida A&M Bethune-Cookman coming up in a few weeks. And that 17-year history gave me the luxury of knowing intimately many of the residents that live literally around Camping World Stadium. So we had a relationship, and our organization had a desire and a bond, I think, with that community. And so we were thinking, what could you do? And again, I'm not very smart, so thankfully the rest of the LIFT board is very, very smart, and the LIFT staff, but
we all know better.
We were running around town saying, we can do this. What if for the first time you could connect a 65,000 seat major kind of NFL grade stadium to the residents that live in its shadow on a vascular level? What if it could become a beating heart of sorts? Not a facility in their midst, but a facility that I think the residents would look at and say, that's ours. The more successful it is, the more successful we are, the more successful this community becomes. Wouldn't that be a story? Wouldn't that be a legacy to leave? And so running around town, as we like to do, and lighting those fires everywhere that you could, eventually ran into Tom Sittema at a Lee Corso dinner we do at a steakhouse, and admittedly it was potentially wine infused, but nonetheless,
Beer in my case.
We all ran into each other, and I think our board had this passion, and we had this vision. And Tom said in that meeting, along with Florida Hospital, one of the biggest partners in our community, Bill Diamond was there and others, and said, we can do this. Tom said, if that's a vision you guys believe in, I'm all in. And Florida Hospital said, if you guys are in, we'll bring the resources of Florida Hospital to the table, and the rest is history. Tom set that first meeting, and off we went. And I couldn't be more proud that, certainly there was divine intervention in some way, shape, or form, but I hope, and Tangi knows this, Tangi and I talk about this a lot, right? She lives literally across the lake on the north end of the stadium. And Tangi would tell you that, I think before maybe even the Feast on the 50 after Lift had got going, she said, Steve, and we were sitting there on the field watching this, she said, this is the first time I've ever seen those fireworks occurring from inside the venue. And so you think about how powerful that is, right? And you talk about now on New Year's Day and any other in the NFL Pro Bowl and all these major events, when you walk in that building and there's 65,000 people on national television, they say, welcome to the West Lakes neighborhood in Camping World Stadium, right? It's ours. And the more that it does, the more that I think this dream's going to be realized over the next generation or two. So that's kind of how it happened. In some way we fell into it, and there was a lot of well-intended people, but because of the people on the stage and the people around those tables, and really the residents, because Tom talked about the survey and the conversations, some of them not always easy, right? And I keep looking at our West Lakes residents, but this is their vision. Nobody came in there and said, this is the way to fix your neighborhood. This is a vision that the residents said, we need to find a way to realize. And we as business leaders came alongside and said, we're in if you're in. And this is your roadmap. We're going to join you, and we're going to make this happen. So that's how
Thank you so much, Steve.
Yeah.
I mean, thank you. There really was something important about that balance of acknowledging that we were just outsiders, willing to do some of the heavy lifting, but the community wasn't ours to decide the direction. And Tim, in the last couple of years, you've stepped into this role. The residents were looking for someone to formally head up the effort of really representing the will of the community. Interviewed a lot of great candidates and really wanted somebody who was like born and raised in the neighborhood, but then decided we want the best person to represent us in this. And I could not think of a better person for us to be partners with than you and your leadership. Thank you for being in this role. Tell us a little bit. Folks are hearing West Lakes. They're not going to see West Lakes on any map of Orlando, not yet. But tell us what is so unique about this neighborhood and some of the things that have happened since the founding of West Lakes Partnership, as the organization is called.
Well, thank you, Eddie. Mayor Jacobs had the opportunity to welcome you to Orange County, Florida. I want to give you an early welcome to the 5 fantastic neighborhoods of West Lakes. And I say that because each one of them is distinct and separate, yet they share a common and strong ethnic and cultural heritage. When Lift Orlando and one of its sister partners, Polis Institute, started its community engagement efforts with our residents in 2013, resident leaders were both suspicious and intrigued by this partnership with this new kid on the block. After all, it's not every day that a nonprofit knocks on your door with the promise to raise millions of dollars. And oh, by the way, trust us along this journey. And so my residents did what most neighborhood leaders and neighborhoods would do when faced with this conundrum. They met at a private home beyond the glare of community meetings, and they plotted their own path forward. 2 fundamental principles emerged from those meetings. One, that the residents were going to partner with the community quarterback called Lift Orlando. But secondly, and most importantly, that they would create their own organization to do 2 things: to ensure that their voices were at the table and that they could do their own initiatives within the community. By 2015, West Lakes Economic Opportunity Council, which was the forerunner of my organization, gave way to its own nonprofit called West Lakes Partnership. We've done 4 things since then that I think are major milestones. We've enlarged the board to reflect all of the voices, or as many voices as possible within the neighborhood. Our leadership team is led by a gentleman who's a business owner. Our vice chair is a retired vice admiral of the Navy, and so our meetings start on time and end on time. They increased their newsletter circulation from quarterly to 6 times a year to make sure information got out to residents more often and early. And then lastly, for a new organization, our residents recently obtained and received a $750,000 grant for housing rehabilitation in the neighborhoods of West Lake to acquire, rehab, and put back on the market 15 single-family homes. As Steve mentioned, West Lakes is the home of Camping World Stadium, the organization that he runs. a site where college football magic has often taken place. And so I want to end on 3 sports metaphors that may reflect on your role as a community quarterback and those of your residents. Number 1, community engagement is a team sport. I just watched my favorite football team lose Sunday, 45-10. And not once, I know, I understand, and not once did either quarterback spike the ball, okay? Number 2, have you ever seen a 250-pound offensive lineman score? If you have, they express that scoring with pure and utter joy. Your residents are on the front line, tackling and blocking for your initiatives, at great risk sometimes to their own reputation in their neighborhood. At every step of the way, empower and involve them at the table. And lastly, I come from a basketball family. We weren't muscular to play football. I played the swing forward position. Steve knows that's the shooting position. Second game, my senior year, I break my glasses. Instead of telling my team I could no longer see, I kept shooting. By the third quarter, I had gone 3 for 13. Finally, a voice yells out beyond my high school bench. And that voice said, "Don't you know how to run the pick and roll?" That voice belonged to my now departed mother. And what I carry from her wisdom that evening into the work we do, or I do, and the work I hope you take back to your community are 2 fundamental principles. That community work involves calling the right plays. And secondly, and most importantly, only if we play as a team can we all win together. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. So good. So Sandy, you know I love you even though I put you after these 3 guys. But it's because you always steal the show, and what you're about to share is also something people will get a chance to see firsthand as we leave here. But tell us a little bit about your vantage point in the next couple of minutes when it comes to housing, and what is it people are going to see today?
So first of all, I want to say thank you all for being here today. You will be better just for attending this conference, I assure you. And for all of you that have gone before us hosting these wonderful conferences, you have really inspired us. We've taken back ideas from every single conference, and just think this organization is incredible, and they have made us better. Meanwhile, back at the bank, while these guys are brainstorming, I actually am a banker, and I worked for a bank in the same building and predominantly owned by the same principal as Tom Sittema. And I had spent 10 years of my career in banking, and then I spent 10 years running an affordable housing consortium that all the banks owned. And I had just come to CNL maybe a few years before Tom joined. And from my experience at the Affordable Housing Consortium, really had a passion for affordable housing. So I'm walking in from the parking garage one day, and Tom catches me, and I can tell, like grabs me by the arm and says, "Sandy, have you been to the Citrus Bowl?" And I didn't answer that right off the cuff, because I've been in Orlando for 30 years, and really what went through my mind was, are you kidding? Like, I live here, you're new, not me, right? So I thought, yeah. And I knew he was baiting me for something, and I could tell he was upset. So I thought, okay, he doesn't like his seats. Didn't like his seats. I know, we're working on the stadium. And so, and he says, yeah, so Jane and I go to the Citrus Bowl, and I'm standing there. I get out of the car, and I'm like, are you kidding me? These living conditions are deplorable. People should not, there's children running around. This community doesn't look safe. And I get out of the car, and I look back, and I see the CNL towers. And I'm like, downtown Orlando is right there. And all the leadership in downtown Orlando is right there. And we showcase our city in the middle of all this blight. And with the leader sitting right there and no one cares. Well, that was like you had just, put a sword in my heart. And I was upset, to be honest. I literally said, well, wait a minute, buddy, thinking you're all new to this housing thing, blight and communities that have been left behind. This is no easy gig. Knowing that I had tried repeatedly, even with Bishop Wiggins, we had tried to take this community back and to really reinvest in it, but we lost, and we kept losing to absentee landlords that were coming in and paying too much, making all these promises, which is why the residents didn't trust us, and then not putting in the money that they promised to do. I get in my car, I watch my car that night, and I'm half like, this guy, are you kidding? And I go to get my keys out of my car, and I get my keys out of my car, and I realize, oh my God, somewhere along the line I gave up, and I quit seeing the blight. And I was half mad. And so I did what I normally do when I'm mad. I thought, well, okay, we're going to try this again. And Mayor Jacobs made just an amazing comment because, I think, Bishop, we had tried and tried. We made some mistakes. And this time, we were better. I knew, don't get in a bidding war. Because if this goes international bid with Fannie Mae, we are gonna lose because you can't overpay for something you're gonna bulldoze. So all those lessons prior that were unsuccessful, they made us better. And so when we were given the chance to try it again, and the one thing I swore I would never do of being the banker, I was never gonna play developer. And sure enough, I end up in a development position, competing for tax credits, all these guys going like, Tom especially, how hard can this be? And any of you that have applied for tax credits know how hard it's, shocker, it's really hard to win $36 million to do this financing, and darn if we didn't win on the very first try. But here was the question. I think Eddy asked me, why was it important that we build high-quality, affordable housing? And in a community that just severely lacked capital, we knew up front we had to bring all the capital to bear that we could to show the residents that they were worth investing in, and to show the world that this community was going to turn things around for the better. And, I can give you all the right answers. I did affordable housing professionally for 10 years. Yeah, we wanted it to be sustainable. Yes, we wanted it to be somewhere that the neighbors would be proud. But in the end, we wanted it to be home. And we tried to build what we would be proud to call home. But we let the residents design it. And that's why it was important that we delivered on the very best that we could for those residents, and so that others would see what we did and start thinking about investing themselves.
Thank you, Sandy. I want to say thank you to the staff at Purpose Built Communities. First, because I don't know where we would be had you not come alongside us. We would be somewhere, but I don't know that we'd be here. And for letting me put all of these folks on stage, knowing how tight we're running on time. But I wanted you to see this is not like one person's imagination convincing a group of board leaders to show up at meetings. It is really a collaborative effort of so many actors, so many people that come together doing this. And the ability to surrender to that energy collectively and then structure it with discipline is what we've been in pursuit of. I second want to thank Polis Institute. Phil Hissam is here. You heard Polis being mentioned. Tom talked about our ability to engage and learn about the community long before we discovered purpose-built communities. This is probably the best research, evaluation, and neighborhood organizing agency in the country that we know of. Please talk to Phil if you're curious about how to do that first step well, because it really, you've been kind of our secret weapon man in so many ways. Phil, please, thank you. And lastly, I want to thank you for holding on to the chatter and the chit-chat that you want to have now as we dismiss, because we're going to have plenty of time to socialize tonight. We actually have a really fun evening planned for you over at the Bowl. But right now, they're literally right outside those doors. A bus is waiting for us to load. We'll give you a tour of the area on our way to the stadium, so as swiftly as possible, gather your belongings, join us on the bus. Thank you so much. God bless. Have a great rest of the day.